Hi. I want to talk to you today about fasting in the yoga tradition and disordered eating because those two things I think need to be kind of out there in the yoga world. And these are things I've been talking about for a long time, actually, and other people have talked about them too. So it's not like they're not there, but I think it's worth revisiting it, particularly because fasting is so kind of trendy right now. And it has been for a while. Actually, I have friends who do fasting retreats, and fasting is great, makes you feel great, wonderful stuff, good for you. There's all sorts of good reasons to fast. And there's another side of the coin, which is that for folks who have a tendency towards disordered eating or eating disorders, which are not exactly the same thing, but similar. It can be really problematic to fast. So I thought I would share a little bit about my own journey. When I was a teenager, I really struggled with depression, and I struggled with self confidence. I struggled with a sense of myself. I struggled with body image. I really struggled with body image. And I totally see where it comes from in terms of what my family, but not just my mom. My mom was struggling with body image, and I think her whole life, and that was because of the culture. It's not. When I realized it wasn't about me having the problem, but it was the culture that was having the problem, it just made me furious, and I started to really rebel against all of that stuff. And that's when I actually started to get better from my eating disorders, was when I was in college and I got kind of politicized. But and then, by the way, I watched Mad Men. I watched the whole Mad Men series like 5 years ago when it first got on Netflix, and that helped me to understand so much of where so many of the ideas about women in the 50s, 40s and 50s and 60s. I guess Mad Men's most like 50s and 60s, but it helped me to understand the soil that my mother grew up in and how she was going to pass those ideas about femininity and being a woman onto her daughters. Like, of course you are, because that's where it comes from in the culture. And Mad Men really opened my eyes to that. I was like, holy shit, all Betty Draper did was smoke cigarettes to stay thin. And, I mean, so like that your value as a woman is so diminished. Luckily we've really come a long way, and I see what's happened in the yoga world in the past 5 years or so with like the so much more acceptance of different kind of bodies is such a positive step. So my own experience was struggling with eating disorders. I had bulimia as a teenager. When I got a little older, I found out about yoga, and I had already been sort of working through a lot of my body image stuff and feeling like, um, it's just like fuck the patriarchy. I mean, that kind of understanding started to shift things for me. But really, what shifted was the yoga practice helped me to regulate my nervous system, so that when I felt angry, when I felt disappointed in myself or other people, that I had some way to come back and really understand and really regulate myself. And then the next piece is understanding who I am, so that I could shore up a sense of self. Because when you have a strong sense of self, then you don't have that you just don't have to worry so much about how you look and all of that stuff that is so external, right? So that was really good for me. But I had another issue happen, which was in the my late 20s. I was traveling in Nepal and India, and I got very sick. And I got sick, and it was based on weaknesses. I think I had psycho emotional as well as physical weaknesses. I think I had. So I got parasites in India, and it's a parasite called blastocystis, which for a lot of people they get it and it doesn't have any problem. But in my very sensitive nervous system, and I had a lot of antibiotics as a child, like I had diarrhea basically every day for about 18 years. Actually, it was bad, and no, the doctors couldn't figure it out. And I live in the United States, and I was teaching yoga, really bad health insurance. I didn't have money to go to the whole story, right? So finally, one of my dear friends, this was back in 2011, I think, one of my dear friends, Marek Sawicki, who's an Ayurvedic practitioner here in Nashville, he said, "I think you have blastocystis," and he got tests run for me, and I did have it, and he knew the treatment, and I found a doctor, and it was like a miracle. I took the medication, and within a couple of days, I didn't have IBS anymore. The reason I tell that story is because during that period where I was struggling with lot of diarrhea and a lot of digestion issues, 18 years, what happened with my eating disorder is that it went underground. I was like, I can eat whatever I want. I'm totally fine. I don't have an eating disorder. And yet I was staying thin because of this issue that I had, so it seemed like it might have been like a spiritual thing. I was just eating whatever I wanted and I meditated a lot and stuff, but there was a lot of hubris there. There was a lot of denial. So 2011, 2012, I started to get better. I started to put on weight. And then my eating disorders started to, not the disorder, but the body image stuff. So I never engaged in um, disordered eating from that point. But I started to be like, oh, my body's not thin anymore. And now I'm like a yoga teacher, and people look at my body. And Marek would say to me, you're very kappa, you need to gain weight. And I'd be like, oh my God, I can't get weight. I'm a yoga teacher. I had all of those feelings, and a lot of those feelings of shame, you know. Um, so fast forward, it's 10 years later. The other piece I want, I've had to work through so much of that stuff. Luckily, I have this amazing partner who's helped me work through so much of it, and just keep coming back. Like, I don't feel like I'm ever going to get over my body image issues, but I keep coming back to who I am, and I keep coming back to, like, it's okay for me. I deserve to eat well. I deserve that. I don't need to restrict or take any of that stuff away. So the next piece that I want to talk about is, what about this fasting stuff? Fasting is supposed to be so good for you. It reduces inflammation. I have Hashimoto's, I have Raynaud's disorder, I have two autoimmune issues. Like, inflammation is a thing. Fasting reduces inflammation. I should be fasting, right? All of that coming up. So recently I started doing some intermittent fasting, and I love the way it makes me feel. And I love how it's reduced the inflammation in my body. And I'm highly cognizant of the fact that it could propel me if I keep, like, forcing it and fasting in a way that's not conscious. It could take me right back into those disordered eating patterns. So one of the things I've chosen to do, because fasting in the yoga tradition is called upavasa. It means being close to the Lord, being close to your higher self. It's typically done by the Vaishnavites, the Krishna worshippers will do it on 3 days before the new moon, 3 days before the full moon, on the new moon, on the full moon. So, like, 4 times a month are fasting dates. And they totally fast, like a whole, like, you go to bed, you wake up the next morning, you don't eat till the next morning. So it's like, 36-hour fast or something. That, I decided long ago, is not good for me. It's not good for me psychologically. I can't really handle it physically either. But intermittent fasting is something I can do on the new moon and the full moon. And all I do is, like, start eating around 11 or 12 in the morning, and then I stop eating at 6, and I try and have three, healthy meals in there. And I have some of the effects of fasting without the psycho-emotional burden of somebody who's had eating disorders. And the other thing is being super transparent about it. So I talked to my husband about it. I'm talking to you about it. And it's like, when you're transparent about it, and when you're not, that's what I learned from addiction studies, is that when you're being honest about it and transparent about it, then you don't have to devolve into the addictive tendency. And so that's what I'm working on right now. I'm working on trying to do a little tiny bit of intermittent fasting, not a big fast, but a little tiny bit of it, and eat healthy as a way to help soothe my digestive system, have a stronger digestion, because I'm dealing with digestive issues, and not as, and not as a way to reify any of those dysfunctional um, body image and eating issues that are so common in our culture, not just in the yoga world. They're rampant in the yoga world, but they're common in our culture too. So I hope that's helpful in you thinking, for those of you who have struggled with body image, with eating disorders, I hope that this is a helpful um, video. I would love to hear your opinion. What have you struggled with? Have you struggled with disordered eating? Have you tried fasting? Have you found a way to make peace with fasting and body image and peace with fasting and food issues? I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. And I'll see you next week. Take care.